Hi, my name is Sandra Hubbard, and today I'm going to be talking about differentiated instruction, why one size does not fit all, and how it impacts adaptive physical education. So let's define differentiated instruction first. It is a philosophy or framework for effective teaching that involves providing different students with different avenues to learning so that all students within a classroom can learn effectively. So in order to do this, as teachers, we need to involve all students no matter their variety in their readiness level, interest, and learning profiles. And we need to make sure all students are included so that everyone can be successful. So to do this, a teacher sets different expectations for task completion for students based upon their individual needs. So you may be asking, why is this important? Well, it is important because no one is the same and no one fits the exact same cookie cutter mold, so differentiated instruction helps teachers reach more students and their learning styles and preferences. So back in 1983, a developmental psychologist by the name of Howard Gardner came up with the multiple intelligence theory. So this theory has the belief that everyone is intelligent, they just have different ways of showing their intelligence. I think this is an important theory to consider for teachers because a lot of teachers teach to the same intelligence a majority of the time, or to the strengths that they as teachers have, instead of teaching to their students' strengths, which is a variety of intelligences. So we as teachers need to adapt our instruction in order to reach as many intelligences at once so we may effectively instruct our students so that they can attain their goals in a given content area. So Howard Gardner came up so far with 8 intelligences he identified. So we'll start with the first one, which is the visual and spatial intelligence. So this student learns best with the use of visual aids such as diagrams, videos, PowerPoint presentations, photographs, charts, movies, slides, etc. They also tend to enjoy drawing, creating, and illustrating. Also, they usually visualize their ideas. The next type of intelligence is the verbal linguistic intelligence, and this student learns best through language arts such as reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So when we think of traditional teaching methods, traditionally they are taught to the verbal linguistic intelligence. So that's just a tidbit for your information. The next intelligence is the mathematical and logical intelligence. These students are skilled in numbers and problem solving. They tend to think abstractly and analytically. Usually they do their best when instruction is logically sequenced, and they enjoy experimenting, questioning, figuring out puzzles, and calculating. The next intelligence that most of us are familiar with as PE teachers is the bodily kinesthetic intelligence. So these are the students that learn best by doing. These students tend to have great motor skills and are coordinated, so they work well with hands-on activities. They tend to enjoy role-playing also, as well as body movement activities and creating and manipulating things, as well as playing games. The next intelligence is the musical rhythmic intelligence, and these students learn best through songs, patterns, rhythms, instruments, chants, and other forms of musical expression. Following that intelligence is the intrapersonal intelligence, and these students tend to be very introspective and in touch with their own feelings, values, and beliefs. They like to spend some time alone reflecting on their learning and how it relates to them. These students like to set goals for themselves, meditate on their thoughts, and participate in self-paced projects or learning, and like to be offered choices in what they do. They also tend to like to learn in a quiet environment. The opposite of this is the interpersonal intelligence, which are the people who work best in groups and interacting with others. So this type of learner is sociable, outgoing, and very people-orientated. They enjoy working in groups and interacting with others helps with their learning process. The last intelligence I want to describe to you is the naturalist. They learn best through nature and patterns in the natural world. These students learn best through classifying and visual discrimination activities, especially when environmental education is involved. They enjoy field trips and outdoor activities such as gardening. So these are the 8 intelligences that have been identified so far. And the reason why I think this is important is because if you look at this chart here, there are a number of disabilities in the school today that this chart shows the percentage of children with each disability. So there's a variety that we have, so we need to learn to teach to a variety of students. The next slide here shows a chart by state, the one on table 1A. It shows the percentage of people that are being served under the IDA, and as you can see, on average it is about 8.6%. And as you can see in table 2, from 1976 to 2006, the percentage has gone up, and that is probably due to the fact that we have identified more individuals. We became better at identifying individuals with special needs, so we are better prepared to modify or adapt our lessons to them. So that's that chart. The next chart is the percentage of students starting from 1992 to 1993 to 2005-2006 school year who have graduated with a diploma over time that are also served under the IDEA. And I think this is important to note because, you know, as physical educators, sometimes we're not really thought of as academically important as the other subjects. But research has shown that physical education helps students improve in other academic areas. So we as physical educators need to adapt our instruction in order to reach these students so they can not only achieve in physical education, which is a requirement in some states but not all states, but also help them achieve in other academic areas as well. Okay, the next slide here is 3 components of instruction that can be modified. This is the content, the process, and the products. So the first one we want to go over is the content. The content identifies the subjects or topics covered within a lesson or a unit. So for example, in a PE basketball unit, this may mean you cover basic ball handling skills such as free throw shots, passing, strategizing plays, basic rules, and fouling. For a student who has challenges in basketball, you may simply just cover basic ball handling skills such as dribbling and passing and some shooting techniques with them, but never really going into rules and strategizing plays. You just have to think of what's best for your student that you are teaching. And for a student who excels, you may go in through more techniques and fouling, such as when it's beneficial to foul, you might go over more advanced ball handling skills and extensive knowledge in rules and advanced strategies for basketball. Okay. So the next part that we as teachers can modify for students, that's part of the differentiated instruction process, is the process, which is the pace of the instruction, as well as how material in a lesson is learned. So that goes back to Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. So we need to ask ourselves as teachers, are we teaching to the kinesthetic learner? Are we teaching to the linguistic learner? Are we teaching to the visual spatial learner? These questions we must ask ourselves just so we know who we are teaching to and if we need to modify that as teachers. The process can also relate to how we group students, and how we group students can be related to the interest level, skill level, as well as learning style preferences. So I'm going to go over how we might group them by their skill level. As PE teachers, I think we need to be careful how we group students, and we need to be proactive in switching up the way we group students, because a variety of methods can be beneficial to a variety of students. So we're going to first talk about partnering students of different abilities. So for example, if we had a volleyball unit and partnered an unskilled student in volleyball with a skilled student in volleyball, we could see benefits for both students. So for the unskilled, they are going to benefit from being paired with a skilled athlete by watching their techniques, and they're watching techniques that are, executed properly with proper mechanics and timed effectively. And another benefit the unskilled athlete has by being paired with a skilled athlete is that they can be taught the skill by a skilled volleyball player. So, they're being taught by someone who knows how to do it. So instead of being paired with another individual who might not know how to perform a skill, they are being paired with someone who knows how, who can help them better their skills. The way I think a skilled volleyball player can benefit by being paired with an unskilled volleyball player is that they are teaching the student, and I think sometimes the best way we can learn more about a topic that we are proficient in is teaching the topic. So by teaching it, the skilled volleyball player may notice their own mistakes that they make when they're performing a skill, because they are teaching it to another student and they have to make sure that they are teaching it properly. So sometimes someone who has skills in an area may have formed a bad habit per se, but they are still able to perform the skill effectively. But when they are teaching it, they are not going to want to teach the unskilled volleyball player the wrong skill, wrong, improper skills. So they will then teach them the right way. Okay, so that's all for the process. The next one we will go over is the product. So the product is essentially, it describes what's being produced or accomplished at the end of a lesson or unit. So this shows some level of mastery in a subject area. So although our goals as adaptive PE teachers may be at the end of a lesson or unit that our students say can correctly perform a skill, such as shooting a free throw shot in basketball, we may need to actually adjust our expectations for our students of different abilities. So for example, in adaptive PE, some students may have physical limitations that may prevent them from shooting a free throw shot properly or at all. So instead, we might have that student perform a free throw. Instead, we might have that student verbally describe how to shoot a free throw shot with the cues we may have given them. Also, we can have them assess a video of someone shooting a free throw shot, or assess another student or a teacher on their free throw shot. This way, they can critique the free throw shot and explain what is being done correctly and incorrectly. So this shows knowledge that the student does in fact know how to perform a free throw shot. They just are not able to physically do it. Another thing we might do, for example, for a student who is neurologically impaired, we may have them point to a picture of a person who is shooting a free throw shot. We may also have the student simply follow instructions as we are verbally describing the directions and visually modeling the instructions. And this may be done with or without the help of a teacher's assistant, depending on our students' ability level. So as you can see in all the ways I described, the students are all essentially still learning the same thing. They're still learning about the free throw shot and how to perform it. It is just that they may be varying on skill levels or varying in their learning method. So I think as teachers, we need to remember that accommodations don't necessarily change the outcome. It doesn't necessarily change what they have learned. In fact, accommodations just offer an alternative way to reach the outcome. So like I said with the free throw shot, all the students are still learning about the free throw shot, how to perform it. They just have different accommodations. Okay, so to review, the three components of an instruction that can be modified are the content, the process, and the products. Now I'm going to go into my personal experience and professional experience using differentiated instruction for adaptive PE. So I'll start off with my experience as a paraeducator in a contained classroom for students with autism. So as a paraeducator, because of my knowledge in PE, I was typically the person who implemented physical therapy for students when the physical therapist was not there, and I was also the one usually who assisted students in adaptive physical education. So one student in particular that had diagnosed autism and Down syndrome, I would just call him Sam, was very difficult to motivate sometimes to do almost anything. So if he didn't want to do something, he tended to sprawl out on the ground and put his head down and say no. However, some things I did notice that he really enjoyed interacting with others and in a friendly way, and he really enjoyed being silly. So because I knew this of him, I used this to help me differentiate my instruction with him. Another thing he also enjoyed was what we would call shakies, and these were objects or strips of paper he would hold and shake. Okay, so one thing that we did in PE class was we wanted to get him to run. So I knew that he would not want to run on his own accord. So how I initially got him to start running was I took a jump rope and dragged it on the ground and started shaking it and running with it, and he would chase after the jump rope. So he would run because he was motivated by the shaking. Okay, but eventually he found an intrinsic value in running. So I no longer needed to drag a jump rope on the ground to motivate it. Instead, he just ran on his own accord. Another accommodation I implemented for him was using simple sequential instructions and exaggerated movements while he was performing a skill. For example, when I was teaching him how to perform an overhand throw, I would show it to him. I would visually show him how to do it, and I would exaggerate my step with the opposite foot while I was throwing. And then, so when Sam was throwing the ball, I simply told him to step, and then I waited for him to step, and then I said throw. And if he used the wrong foot to step, I would simply correct him by pointing to the foot he needed to use or tapping on the foot that he should use, and he would typically correct himself when I would do that. So simple instructions really helped him, as well as using things he enjoyed, like the shaky. Okay, one other thing the PE teacher wanted Sam to develop was upper body strength. So she had students lie in the prone position on a scooter using their arms to propel them forward. So because Sam had low muscle tone, he was not really motivated to do this because this was a hard task for him. So what I did was I put a plastic bowling pin within his reach, and he enjoyed knocking it down because he enjoyed being silly. He enjoyed interaction with other people. So I would put it right within his reach, and he would knock it down, and then I would move it further and further away, and then he would use his arms to propel him forward in order to knock down a pin. Eventually, it got to the point where I could put the pin on the other end of the gym, and he would be motivated to propel himself um, to the end of the gym in order to knock the bowling pin down. So, I mean, for this skill, he never became intrinsically, he never had the intrinsic value to do it on his own without the motivation of the bowling pin. But, all students will find different values and different things, and that's okay. We just need to modify our teaching for them in order for them to perform the skill. Okay, now I'm going to go on about my experience as a respite worker. So, as a respite worker, personally, my duties were to get the student I work with out into the community to participate in activities because he had a great anxiety over going to new places and doing new things. But I also performed personal training with him as well as teach him sports skills. And I did this in order that he could gain confidence in his skills to participate with peers in sports and play when the opportunity arose. So the particular individual I worked with, his name Roy, was very unmotivated with physical activity, but he did like routine, and he did like to follow schedules. So what I did for him initially starting out, I would print out his schedule for him. So I printed it out so he could not change it. And then I would have a selection of time that would be something that I wanted to do. And then I would have a selection of time after that he could choose what he wanted to do. Okay, so then that worked well because he liked to follow schedule. He also was, his learning style, he liked music and rhythm. So a lot of times when I was doing exercises with him, I would turn on the radio, or sometimes I would sing, and he would be much more motivated to participate with music than without. So one example is one task that was hard for him was balancing on a Bosu ball, and he would balance on it, and he would have a medicine ball that he would toss, that I would have him toss to me. He didn't really like doing this. This was kind of a hard task for him. So, because he also liked listing things, sometimes we would go through listing items such as states and capitals. So I would have the ball, I would say a state, I would toss the ball to him, and he would say the capital of the state. He really liked listing things and music. So for him, I think listing and music was a distraction mechanism for him, and it really helped him to complete more physical activity than he would without it. And I think a lot of times as educators, and we think we need to modify our instruction a lot differently for individuals with special needs than for anyone else. But I really think that especially this example is no different than the rest of us, because a lot of times in the gym you'll see people listening to music, talking to a friend, or watching TV, and they use that as a distraction mechanism so they can complete something they might not necessarily enjoy doing. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to talk about another experience I have as working as a personal trainer at Oak Lawn Park District in the Special Recreation Department. So for this experience, I I go to a vocational center for adults who have special needs. So the age range is probably from 18 on to 80, 90-year-olds. So it varies a lot in age range. The class time is only 15 minutes because it's during their break. It's on voluntary basis. They can choose to come to the class or they could choose not to come to the class. And there's a huge mobility range. So there's a lot of people who are young and very mobile. There are people who have walkers. There are people in wheelchairs. There are people with joint issues. So there's a really large mobility range. So with this class, because there's such variety in everything, I really have to have my fitness classes reach everybody, figure out a way I can reach everybody. So I decided my goal for these classes was maximizing movement. Because this is a voluntary class and individuals do not have to come to the class, I don't worry too much on people not participating and not trying to exercise because it's voluntary. So what I do for this class is usually I do aerobic classes, and for all my exercises, or most of my exercises, I use all 4 limbs in the exercise. So for this, in using all 4 limbs, everyone can participate because people who might have limited mobility in their legs can still use their arms in the exercise. They can modify just using their arms, or individuals who have limited mobility in their arms can modify the exercise by just using their legs. So for me, I try to make sure every exercise has all 4 limbs moving. I also keep a constant moving exercise class, and I do this because it's such a short class and my goal is to have them get in as much exercise as possible. Another thing I do is I try to play different types of music each time, just because there's such an age range, so many different types of interest and individuals. So I try to play different music, so at least all people will have something they like some of the time, instead of being stuck with listening to pop music all the time or rock music. I try to switch it up every time I go there. Okay. Now I will go on to talk about my next experience, which was working as a fitness instructor at a place called Right Fit, which has a nationally recognized program for autism fitness. And one thing that facility did to differentiate the instruction and have most students be comfortable with participating is they always had a schedule ready for every student. They used PECs, so those are that's a picture communication device. So they had pictures with words underneath telling them what they would be doing. They also had visual cues, so they used colored arrows so the students would know where they could go. They had feet placed down so students knew where they should place their feet, and hands for throwing, etc. They also used timers, and they would use a timer, and then once the timer would ring, all the students would know that it's time for the next thing to do on their schedule, so they would get that cue from the timers. Another thing we used was whiteboards, and whiteboards were really helpful for when students had free time. A lot of times with kids who have autism, they have difficulty coming up with what to do during their free time. So a lot of times we would use whiteboards and write down 2 choices so they could pick a choice. Sometimes, a lot of times, giving these students choices really helped them, because sometimes just telling them they had free time, they would have a meltdown because they didn't know what to pick. Okay, so one student in particular I want to tell you all about is a student I had that I will call him Mohammed, and he always had a meltdown if you said the word no. So he would, if he heard the word no, he would throw things, he would kick things, he would become very aggressive. So for that, instead of using the word no, sometimes instead, I would try not to talk at all, because at first it was hard for me, and I would just write down the things that came next, or things I wanted to communicate with him. Also, it helped me learn that the word no is kind of a negative word. Instead of telling him no, for example, instead of telling a student no running, I learned to use the words, things that he could do. So I would tell him, walk please. So that kind of brings a whole different, that brings more of a positive light instead of a negative with the word no. So he would calm down if he got into a meltdown, if we wrote things down for him instead of speaking them to him. And I think this was because he had very large vocabulary, and he liked reading. He liked the written word, so this calmed him down a lot. Okay, so I hope you all learned a lot about differentiated instruction by my presentation, and I hope you learned something you can apply to your classroom. Okay, so here is a video I found, and I think they did a very good job in adapting physical education for this student.
Alex Yachuk. I'm a phys ed specialist at National Access Middle School in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Well, a big thing is just keeping them active no matter what, and as long as my entire group or class knows that it doesn't matter what your ability is, that we can adapt, and that it can be fun regardless of your athletic ability. You know, it's one thing to see kids sitting on the sidelines, but it's another to see these kids having a hard time with their own confidence, their own self-esteem, and not believing that they can do something. And I see it all the time with kids placing limits on themselves at such a young age. So I think seeing that is kind of a motivator to get them off the sidelines and into the game.
My name is Lee McDougall, and I'm a K to 12 phys ed mentor here in District 18, or what used to be District 18 in New Brunswick. There's a boy behind us who is running. There's a boy I met as a grade 1 student who was blind, and I was working with his classroom teacher at the time. And so I met him and was absolutely amazed at what he was able to teach me. And so he sort of has been my jumping off point. I've known him since he was 6 years old, and he's the one that made me aware of sort of some divots, so to speak, in some of the knowledge for our teachers. Probably the easiest adaptations are speaking directly with the kids and making as few adaptations as possible, making the experience as real and as much like everybody else's as possible. It's making just sort of from soup to nuts in your equipment room, but the best way to do it is to talk directly to the students and find out what they're comfortable with and working with them to make the adaptations.
My name is Janet McVicker, and I'm a vision teacher with the Atlantic Provinces Special Education Authority. I'm based out of Fredericton, but I have students in a number of districts, so I do some traveling out of Fredericton to see my students. When I work with my students, it's about having them understand the tools and adaptations, modifications that they can make to the activities that they're involved in, so that they can advocate for themselves when they're participating elsewhere, that they can tell someone or their friends or peers or other teachers what it is that they can do to participate. One student that I have who is blind, when he was in elementary, the kids played soccer at recess and at noontime on the soccer field, and or actually they were setting it up on a baseball field, and they played soccer baseball, and the kids were playing, and my student walked over to where he was on his own, and he walked over to where the game was being played, and the kids engaged him. They brought him up to the home plate, and instead of rolling the ball, they put the ball in front of him, so he just had to kick it. And then someone on first base, someone on the other team from first base, when he kicked the ball, the person on the other team was clapping at first base so he would know where the base was. So he ran to the base. And then when he was on first base, they turned him around to face second. The next person came up, kicked the ball, and someone on second base on the other team clapped to make him go there. But the beauty is, they weren't going to give it to him. It wasn't a gift because the ball went too close to second base. So the person picked up the ball and tagged him out. So they knew how to engage him because they knew by clapping and by putting the ball in front of him rather than rolling it to him, he was able to participate and play. So the kids, by knowing how to involve him, by seeing the adaptations that are made by their physical education teachers or others, when he's on his own, when he's out playing with his friends, they know how he can play. And so it's a lot of that. Once the kids understand that, number one, the kids can play and how they can help them play, then they're all over it.
Justin Marshall, Para MB Sport and Recreation, Fredericton.
Thank you for watching.